Exactly. So welcome, everyone. We're here, of course, going to be reviewing modules 5 through 7. And of course, we have learned about the local funding primarily through property tax. And now we're going to learn about the state's funds that come to public schools. And of course, we realize that parochial schools receive some state monies, but not very much, quite frankly, and compared to their other areas. So, with that being said, how's the organization of the course for you in Blackboard? Is it understandable to you? Is it, things making sense as you go through each one of the steps? I'll take that as a yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So here we go. And of course, get your notes out. And I'm going to do what I did the last time. And of course, I was happy that I decided to send you my notes because I know that that helped you more easily figure out what I was looking for on the quizzes. And so therefore, this time you'll be using the video as a review as opposed to my notes. So with that being said, the very first, and when I put this together, I always start at the source. Where's the money come from as far as the state's concerned? And then we work down through the process to distribute that money to the public schools in particular. And so from there, identify and describe the state's two top general fund revenue or income sources. What are those two top revenue sources? Now remember, I'll ask someone to volunteer.
Income tax.
Okay, and income tax is number one. State individual income tax. And of course, there's also a state corporate tax on their revenue as well. But primarily the individuals pay the most. And of course, there are a few states that do not have state income tax. Michigan is not one of them. You have to pay state income tax. It's like I do here in Arizona. What's the second one? Anna, can you tell me? The second revenue, largest revenue source. Clarissa?
Would it be property tax?
No,
Or am
property tax is strictly in Michigan and most other states, that's strictly local funding. So where does the state get the second largest amount of money?
sales tax?
Sales tax, general sales tax. What is the percent in Michigan? 6%, 5%, 6%?
50.
50%.
Yeah. And of course, the way that works is the vendor collects it, and then every month that vendor, based on their sales, sends the state the allocation that they have to pay. Okay. So now,
So what I've read is that 31%. So what is like that's like just the total for America, the 31%?
yes, and I don't have the percentages available to me, but I'm going to make a guess. I'm going to guess that over 50%, maybe up to 60% is income tax, and then another 30% is sales tax, and then the other taxes are like excise tax. We're going to get into that a little bit later here on fuel and things like that. There are licenses and fees, although I want you, another thing it's good for me to point out at this point, we're talking about general fund. So general fund means that the monies come into a kitty and it can be spent on anything, as opposed to when you pay when you pump your gas, you pay an excise tax on fuel. that money is earmarked in most cases strictly for the transportation department of the state. Fix roads, fix bridges, do those kinds of things. So those would be restricted, that's restricted income. But the income tax and the sales tax are unrestricted, can be spent however the state feels they should be spent. My ladies from Vietnam, what are the biggest income sources for the government of Vietnam? Income tax? Do you pay income tax?
Yes, we also have a tax, but it's not for everyone. But I think they will based on the business, like a company, something like that.
Oh,
I
okay.
think that a foreign investment, they will pay the tax
Yes.
and they will use that tax for the education.
Okay. What about sales tax? When you buy an item in Vietnam, do you pay an additional tax?
Yeah, normally in our village, we go to the grocery
Yes.
and buy anything. And I think with a small grocery, they don't need to pay the tax.
Okay.
I think that a big business, they will have to official document that the company, so they have to pay tax.
Businesses are taxed.
Yeah.
So you make a good point that probably is worth saying, is that food and some other items are not taxed.
Yeah.
Sales tax is not applied to particularly food items at the grocery store. So we don't pay that. Okay, so now we get into, what does the government spend this money on? What are the two largest recipients of state monies?
Education.
Education, yes. Public
And
K through 12 education. That's number two, actually. Number one
Yeah,
is
healthcare.
healthcare service.
social services, which includes Medicare and
Yeah.
things such as that. Okay, so those are the two largest. Social services is the largest, and public K through 12 education is second largest. That's usually kind of surprising to individuals. Higher education gets a cut of the state monies as well. We already talked about transportation. Okay, so now we're going to move into just some general terms related to taxation. And those terms are progressive, proportional, regressive, and sin taxes. So can someone explain to me what a progressive tax is?
I think progressive taxes, for example, if the income of the person either higher and higher, so they have to pay the tax higher and higher.
Yes, in a progressive tax system, the more a person makes, the more they pay. And income tax is an example of a progressive tax. Okay. The next one is called proportional tax. Proportional.
All income levels are taxed the same?
Yes, all incomes are taxed the same, and sales tax is an example of that kind of tax. Now, granted, the more you spend, the more you pay, but on average, if an individual buys a car, whether they're wealthy or not wealthy, they're going to pay a certain percentage of tax on that purchase. Okay. Then there's regressive tax. Regressive tax.
Well, sin tax would be an example of that, right?
Yes, a sin tax would be an example. Regressive means that poorer people pay a larger percentage or a greater proportion of their income than do more wealthy individuals. And an example of that would be fuel, tax on fuel. it's regressive, meaning that although it's also proportionate, everybody's paying the same thing, but on average, individuals who are poorer are paying a larger percentage of their income for that. And then we get into sin taxes, and they kind of speak for themselves. Tax on alcohol, tobacco, gambling, marijuana, things that would be classified as sin. And so the reason we want you to have an idea about this is because on average, states look at these various ways to get money from the taxpayers. And so one of the easiest to always pass, quite frankly, is a sin tax. So if they're going to increase the tax on tobacco, they don't feel bad about that because it's a sin, okay? As opposed to when they start talking about increasing income tax rates, people get pretty fired up about that. And so states look at these various tax forms and make some decisions about how they're going to increase taxes if they need to. Okay, so now we're going to get into the next part of the process. So we've talked about collecting the money, and now we're starting to talk about spending that money. And the state has two different budgets. They have two different budgets. Can anyone tell me one of the two different budgets?
Annual?
It is annual. In Michigan, both are annual. So yes, that's part of it, but that's not the actual type of budget.
The operating budget?
Absolutely. Good job, Fatima. Yes, operating budget. And the operating budget is what is budgeted for education, as well as the other things that the state has to budget for, okay? So the operating budget has the largest impact on public schools and the funding that they receive. What's the next one, Steve?
Capital.
Capital budget. And a capital budget is for where the state budgets for buildings, universities, state hospitals, government structures, elementary and secondary schoolhouses. So a certain amount of money is put into a capital budget, and those monies are then sent to schools who apply for construction loans or monies for building a building, or universities are building a new building. Now, not Madonna. Of course, Madonna would not receive any of this money, either way, operating or capital. So that's the mechanism to spend the money. Okay, and there's a process, and you don't have to know this, but I'm just going to quickly go through it so you get an idea as to how these budgets are put together. Okay, so the budget process, first of all, a term you need to know is fiscal year, and that's when the business year begins. And Michigan is odd. Michigan is October 1st. There's probably only 5 states that start October 1st. Most of the states start July 1st. That's their business fiscal year. Okay. So with that being said, the budget has to be completed and enacted by October 1st. So you go back, you start back in typically about 6 to 7 months out, and the State Office of Budget and Management provide guidance to the various state agencies, Department of Education, Department of Transportation, et cetera, and they listen to what they want, what they would like to have as far as the budget's concerned. And that agency then looks over the requests, and they put together a budget recommendation for the governor. The governor then presents that to the legislature. The legislature talks about it, they make a decision, and in Michigan, the decision is how much will they provide per student. That's how it's decided, per student. And from there, the two bodies talk about their budget bills. Ultimately, there's a joint conference with the legislators from both chambers coming together, and they have one recommendation. That recommendation is then passed, sent to the governor, and then the governor typically signs it. That's the process, and it has to be done by October 1st. This is a good time for me to tell you this. So people get a little bit confused about the importance of the budget versus the importance of an appropriation. And here's the significant difference. You cannot spend money from a budget. You can only spend money from an appropriation. And so therefore, that budget gets transferred into an appropriation. And in schools, you have to have an appropriation measure passed by the school board. And in Michigan's case, it has to be done by October 1st. If you don't have it passed by October 1st, you can't spend any money. Okay? And so that's the importance of that. So just want you to give you just a general idea of how that functions. Okay? So now we're going to get into the delivery system, the distribution system. And as you might have read, there's about 4 or 5 different ways to distribute, the ways that states distribute the money to public schools. Foundation, equalization, power equalization, a hybrid model. Michigan uses a very straightforward foundation formula. Okay, foundation formula. And I'm going to show you this. Can you see that? You're still seeing me? Oh, I can't. Got to hit share. Now you can see it, can't you? Can you see it now? Is that a yes? You can see it?
Yes, we could see
Okay.
it.
So the basic formula for public schools. Now remember, the state has collected this income tax primarily and sales tax. They have decided on how much money they're going to put into public education, and now they're going to deliver that to each individual schools. And the state Department of Education is the delivery agent, basically. Here's the formula. You take the number of pupils that you have in your district, you multiply it by the amount of money per student that the legislature has determined, and that gives you a figure, and then they subtract the local non-homestead property tax revenue. So most people think that you end up getting all the money that the state allocates. The answer is you don't, because of this little component right here. And the idea of this component is that school districts who have a high valuation per pupil, remember that terminology, valuation per pupil? Districts that have a high valuation per pupil will receive less money than districts with a low valuation per pupil. Okay. We're back. So just wanted to give you the overview of that. Do I expect you to you're not going to do any formulas or anything like that. You don't have to worry about that. I just want you to understand that the idea behind a foundation program is that they're going to take the pupils that you serve, they're going to multiply by the amount of money that legislature have allocated per student, but then they're going to subtract out that local property value to try to equalize it. Okay, Now we're going to get into for Catholic, for you folks that want to know about Catholic schools. Of course, there was a very recent legal case in Michigan that blocked public funds for Catholic schools. I'll start out by saying to you that many states had Baby Blaine amendments. I hope you remember Baby Blaine amendments that was blocking parochial schools from receiving state money. And then a number of states started to challenge that in court. A number of states won. Michigan did not. The case was Jill and Joseph Heil and lots of other people against the state of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, governor, in her official capacity, and the treasurer. And on September 30th, 2022, it was decided that the funds for non-public schools would be prohibited. They would be prohibited from receiving public funding. And kind of a sad day, quite actually, for individuals in parochial schools. There was another case, and that case then went to the Sixth Circuit, and it was upheld. It was upheld. So sadly, there's little money that's going to come from the state in order to help fund the education for parochial students. Catholic schools do receive some funding, okay? You need to hear that. They do receive some funding. Let me ask you, Carissa, are any of your students transported by buses?
We do have students transported by buses, and they get picked up from the local public school district.
Yes, and they're transported on local district school buses.
Yes. Mhm.
So in essence, the parochial school student is receiving some state money because of their transportation.
Yes.
It's handled like that in most states. Most states do entitle parochial school students transportation state monies. Another program that Michigan students do receive is for testing programs. Now, what testing program do your students participate in?
Are you talking about like a state level testing program?
Yes. Academic testing.
We use an archdiocesan testing program. So it's our standardized tests go through the archdiocese, and it's a program that they have elected us to utilize.
Oh, okay. And so you don't use the state's testing program?
No, but the only testing that we do that utilizes anything from the school district would be if a student is needing to be tested for a learning disability.
Yes. And we'll get into that when we get into federal. Those are federal programs that pay for those kinds of things. So the last thing that Michigan does allow, or there's a couple of other things that Michigan does permit, is educational media centers. Now, I don't know, Carissa, have you ever gone to the, gosh darn it, I can't remember what you guys call them, educational service center, maybe, the county office or something like that for professional development? Have you ever participated in professional development with public school teachers?
I have on a county level.
Yes.
Where we go to like a county place like Oakland County. But other than that, no, it's usually archdiocesan.
Yeah, but you have participated. And
yes.
Those, the monies that back those kind of events is state money. So the parochial teachers are receiving some benefit of public monies. The next one is auxiliary services. An auxiliary service provides students that attend non-public schools the same kinds of assistance. For example, remedial reading could be monies could come from the state for remedial reading, okay? But once again, Michigan is one of the states that has a very unfavorable attitude toward providing parochial schools public state monies. Okay. One of my friends in Ohio is very favorable, quite frankly. And they have 3 or 4 different mechanisms to receive state monies. In fact, one of the principals that I taught told me that if it wasn't for the state monies that they were receiving, they would probably have to close their doors. So that's how impactful it is. Okay. Here's some other, and of course, Michigan doesn't have these programs, but I want you to hear them. And of course, I've talked to Steve about, I know Steve's view on equality and equity and equitable funding and those kinds of things. And I had a long conversation about what can be done to pry open the eyes of state legislators. And I would want to arm you folks with ways in which monies are given to parochial parents for their children's education, voucher programs, where they are given X number of dollars and they can use those monies wherever they choose to use them. And if they use them in a parochial school, that's fine. You can do that. Tax credit programs. These programs are giving assistance to individuals who provide funding for parochial students. Okay, so those are the 2 of the programs. So now we're going to get into, with state funding, there's basically 3 different ways monies get to schools. Okay, the first one is the foundation program. The next one is through categorical aid. And can someone tell me what categorical aid is? What does that mean?
I have some, is it the categorical funds?
Yes,
Okay.
categorical funds are restricted monies. Restricted funds can only be used for specific kinds of things.
It says for transportation, small schools, and provisions for English learners.
Yes, absolutely. Good job. So yes, in Michigan, the formula does not provide money for transportation. They have a second vehicle to get money to schools for transportation. Another one that's very popular is special education. That's another categorical area. I was a little bit I wasn't surprised. And Michigan has 2 weights. We'll get into that here in a little bit later, but Michigan has 2 weights for special education, which isn't very many, quite frankly, given the fact that there's probably 10 identified categories on the continuum for special education. The one that was a little bit disappointing to me is Michigan gives no money for gifted education. So if a school system has children identified as gifted, there's no extra money coming to the school district for gifted education. In Ohio, they do recognize gifted education. You provide them the number of students that you have that are classified as gifted, and then they give you X number of dollars per child for that classification. So categorical aid is aid that is restricted and provided for specific purpose. In most cases, transportation and special education are the 2 most popular categorical funds. So money's coming through the foundation program, and money's coming through through categorical funding. Okay. next way that money comes through to states. And also, in this one, parochial schools can benefit with a couple of these if they're written in the law properly. And that is state entitlement grants and discretionary grants. Could someone tell me the difference between an entitlement grant and a discretionary grant, or entitlement funding and discretionary funding?
A discretionary grant would be one that you have to apply for some specific program. So it may be a competitive grant or something like that.
Yes.
Um, so your application for it, or even how much you need it, is not necessarily equal to how much you get or whether you get it at all.
Yes, it's competitive. You have to apply for it. They're looking at your application. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy or not wealthy. If you meet the criteria, you are provided those monies. Entitlements, on the other hand, are just that. You're entitled to this money. So let's go back to the process. As the legislature is working on their budget, they decide that they are going to put a certain amount of money into an entitlement grant and then allow every school system to receive those kinds of monies. Now, generally, it's based on your student population. The larger your school is, the more money you get. But in general, and in Michigan, there are two, at least there were, two entitlements, meaning that every district in the state of Michigan receives this money. One is called Kids Back on Track. And the idea of that particular program was we went through a pandemic, kids were out of school for a long time, and the state wanted to kickstart and help students get back on track. And so that's what those monies were entitled for, okay? Every school got those monies. The next one, another entitlement, is called Assessment Digital Literacy Preparation Program. And this is with technology, okay? I don't know exactly how much the legislature allocated in those two entitlements, but whatever is there, it is then divvied up amongst all of the states. I have a pretty funny story to tell with regard to entitlements. So when I was superintendent, the state of Ohio legislators decided that elementary children were not learning enough business concepts. And so they decided to put an entitlement amount of money toward providing students with business concepts. So I kept bugging the State Department as to when they were going to release his monies. When are they going to release it? I knew it was entitled to it. I wanted my money. And they were given, I'm not sure if my memory is totally accurate on this, but about $600 per class, K through 3. Now, in my building, or my school district, I had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. I had 18 classes. So 18 times 600, that's not chump change. You know, we wanted to receive that money. So finally, they released the money in late December. They released it in late December. And you had like 30 days to turn it around. You had to fill out an application, and you were entitled to get it, but you had to apply for it, basically. Nice, December, good. Nice job, state. And so we got it. And so I looked over the entitlement, and in the entitlement, it was very vague how you could use this money. You had to use it for business purposes. Now, how much paper money can you buy for $600. Probably quite a bit of paper money. Anyway, long story short, we decided to buy digital projectors with the money, and we got a CD was for business, and that was the purpose from it. My treasurer came to me and said, "Are we going to get audited for this?" I said, "No." I said, they're not paying attention to it, and they didn't. Okay, anyway, so that's entitlement. We were entitled that, we took it, and if they would have said we had to buy money games, well, we would have bought money games, but they didn't say, well, how to spend it. The other is discretionary. And once again, you have to apply for this. Michigan has two different types of discretionary grants. One is called robotics. So once again, back to the legislature. The legislature decided that they wanted schools to introduce students to robotics. And so the way that they chose to do that was to provide a competitive grant for monies to do that. The other one is called additional instruction time. So once again, I think back to the idea that they were trying to assist schools to get back on track with academics after the pandemic. So basically, those are the 4 different ways. Now, the reason I say that parochial schools very well within the legislation, parochial schools could be allowed to compete for grants. Okay, I'm not going to say they will be able to or not be able to, but they may be able to. Okay, and they may be entitled to the entitlements. You know, the one thing that about parochial funding and state monies, you know, many of the other states make this claim, and I think it's a very sound piece of reasoning. They say that a parochial school student is learning math, they're learning to read, they're learning to write, they're learning to compute. What does that have to do with religion? And many states have made the claim that it does not have to do with religion. Therefore, they're entitled to some money. Okay. So now let's get into the way Michigan funds special education. As a category, it's a categorical funded amount, and they reimburse schools the cost of special education services. And they use only two weights. And with that, the school systems are tabulating how much money they're spending, and then they submit that to the state, and the state provides a partial reimbursement for those expenses. And once again, they're using two weights. Okay. So in general, we want to just kind of review for a moment. We want to think about the way the state gets their money, what the state spends their money on, how the state decides how much money schools are going to get with their budget through the process, then the delivery system. How do they get that money into the school systems? They use a foundation program with a formula. And then from there, what other ways can schools receive funding? With categorical aid, with the 2 different types of entitlements and competitive grants. That's how states fund public schools. And of course, as we said, parochial schools are very limited with their funding. So within this, there were quite a few terms Okay? Are there any particular terms you'd like for me to explain to you? So I'm going to highlight a few of these, okay? Of course, we want you to know the difference between an operating budget and a capital budget, okay? We want you to know fiscal year, October 1st through September 30th. That's the fiscal year in Michigan. Understand restricted income versus unrestricted income. And once again, restricted revenue, an example would be coming from tax on gasoline. And the money that's collected there can only be used for transportation, okay? As opposed to income tax and sales tax, and that's unrestricted revenue, can be used however, okay? Don't really have to spend, I don't expect you to remember all the models of distribution. You know, there's the flat grant, the foundation model, the full funding model, full-time, full funding. Those are the primary power equalization, but you don't need to know those. Categorical funding, multiple student weights. Can't remember if it was Anna or Fom who, I think it was Fom, maybe in your discussion post, you were talking about multiple student weights, right?
I did.
Was
I did.
You did? Oh, okay. It was Anna.
Yeah.
Okay. And you found it to be quite interesting that those various weights were part and parcel to how monies were provided. Okay.
Yeah. So for multiple student ways, they will offer a special education for students who with disabilities. And for the, but I'm not very understand clearly for the single. So it's depend on how.
Okay, so yeah, good question. Let me explain that. So when a state decides that they only are going to be funding a single weight, that means that regardless of what the disability is of the child, the school is only going to get X dollars for that, for all the children. And you have to understand that, you know, to educate a child with speech, needing speech, speech issues, that is much less expensive than a person who has ADHD. Individuals who have ADHD can cost the district up to $20,000 per kid to educate per year. Yeah, very, very expensive. And so, quite honestly, I mean, you know, one of the things we want you to be aware of is some of the issues with Michigan. Of course, the first issue is they don't give any money or very little money to parochial schools. That's a big issue. And that there are states that do in fact give money. The second thing we want you to know is, you know, quite honestly, it's appalling that they only use 2 weights when there are like 10 different classifications. And some of them are much more severe and cost the school district a lot more to educate. Person who is totally blind, you need lots of equipment, you need lots of support, you need lots of help. And so therefore, in Michigan, 2 weights. That person, the school system is getting, first of all, the school system is obligated by federal law to educate the child in accordance with their disability. So the school system has no choice. They've got to educate them in the way that is best suited for their disability. The problem is the state government isn't giving them enough money in order to particularly pay for those high intense disabilities. Okay. Of course, we want you to make sure that you understand entitlements versus discretionary.
I have another question.
Yes.
Can you explain more what are differences between the tax credit program and voucher program?
Okay. So I'll first talk about tax credit. So with tax credit, a person applies or a person is completing their income tax and they want a certain amount of money to go to a parochial school. They get credit. So if they give $5,000 to a school under that program, they don't have to pay tax on that money. So you see how that's a real nice incentive for the parochial schools to receive money. A voucher program is this. In a voucher program, the state, if the state identifies that they are giving $6,000 per student, okay, that money actually is in concept given to the student. And the student can take that $6,000 from the state and go to a parochial school and spend that $6,000 at the parochial school. So two distinctly different ways of helping parochial schools and parochial school students and parents. Good question. Very good question. Anything else? With nothing, we are going to turn off the recording